Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Having completed our long, deep dive into 1972 pop culture in the last episode, I thought it was high time that we took a while to discuss some of the great comments and information that have come in through the viewer comment section in episodes over the last couple of months or so. There's a lot I want to mention, more than I'll be able to get to, but I thought we'd turn this into a two-parter so that we can at least hit the tip of the iceberg, as it were. As you might expect from the subject matter of recent episodes, a lot of the comments have been about Carl and the Passions So Tough. I promised a break from 1972 this week, so we'll put off that Carl and the Passions discussion until part 2, though there'll be some overlap this time because I do want to follow up on some of the comments and feedback on the Sail on Sailor box set in this episode. Before we really get started, I did want to take a minute to mention episode 153, U.S. Pop Culture 1972 Part 7, and my singing in that episode. I'm never in very good voice, but I was just getting over a cold when I did that, and having rewatched it, singing some of those titles was particularly bad even for me in that episode. So sorry about that. Can't promise it won't happen again, because some of those titles just seem to need to be sung, but I hope I'll be in a little bit better voice, at least a little bit, in the future. In episode 150, Cool Stuff, What I Did on My Holidays, I shared the handwritten lyrics that I'd found on display at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and talked about the apparent changes. Most of them were clear improvements, but I wasn't sure why they had changed Letterman jacket to Letterman sweater in the second verse. John Augustine with the Experience, who's a former English teacher, lyricist, and singer, offered the highly technical, as he put it, observation that Letterman's sweater is way funner to sing than Letterman jacket. I'm sure that's undoubtedly correct. Michael Teggio suspected that the lyric was changed from jacket to sweater because the syllables line up better with letter, sweater and letter. And it rolls off the tongue easier because of the similar sound, and I can definitely hear that. Thanks, Michael. Tony S. also thought that it probably just sounded better, observing that words with softer vowel sounds come off better on tape. Also, he thought they might have been worried that jacket might inadvertently come off sounding like jackass on the record, which certainly seems like a possibility too, and that would have been pretty harsh language in 1963. Also, regarding my trip to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in December and the scarcity of Beach Boy items I found on display, Betamax Blocker said that his family had visited the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame years ago and that there had been a dedicated Beach Boy display that included jackets and guitars, and they had photographed it for him. I also heard from Lake Erie Surfer 1, which is a great screen name, who was a docent at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for a number of years, and confirmed that they do have more Beach Boy artifacts than what I saw, and they're displayed periodically. Among those items is one of Carl's guitars, Bruce's surfboard, and the handwritten lyrics to God Only Knows. I'm not sure, but for some reason, the idea that they have Bruce's surfboard really appeals to me. I think I particularly like the really arcane items. Anyway, I hope it'll be on display sometime when I'm back for another visit. Looking around online, I found a photo of the God Only Knows lyrics. The museum caption isn't in the photo, so I don't have any real detail on this. The way they're so carefully written out, with the writing credits neatly at the top and the publishing info at the bottom with no corrections to the text, I'm guessing this isn't the sheet they used when putting the song together. Happen to know any more about that Lake Erie Surfer? Does anybody else know? Thanks for the info and feedback on that, and I hope I'll get to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame again sometime soon. In recent comments on episode 94, Beach Boy Album Covers Part 11, Nicholas Pearl tells me that he recently purchased Summer in Paradise from Amazon Marketplace and that his copy came with instructions on how to assemble the Eco Pack cover. Nicholas sent me these photos of the assembly instructions that came with his copy. As mentioned in that episode, the Eco Pack was meant to be an environmentally friendly alternative to the CD long box, which was the industry standard at the time. Retailers liked the long box because it made the CDs easier to display and to market. They also liked the long box because they could fit into existing record bins, and the size made them harder to steal. Pretty much everybody else saw the long boxes as wasteful. And under pressure from environmental groups like Ban the Box, the Recording Association of America, RIAA, announced in March of 1992 that the long box would be phased out by April 1993. What wasn't clear was what would replace it. As Kurt Loder reported on MTV News in '92, Tower Records on Sunset in LA kind of passively aggressively experimented with displaying boxless CDs, quoting an unnamed tower executive, to give people an idea how crappy the store of the future looks. There was the so-called lift system where empty jewel boxes were displayed and taken to the counter where the clerk would pull out the CD at the time of purchase. This required the stores to purchase new bins, and record stores complained would require more manpower to track down the CDs for each purchase. Then there was the plastic keeper, frames that held the CDs and fit into existing record bins. I bought my copy of Summer in Paradise at Aaron's on Highland in Hollywood on the day of release in August 1992. Aaron's was, I believe, the first LA record store to convert to the keeper system, and I think it was already in place when Summer in Paradise came out. Whenever it happened, I certainly remember how ridiculous and unwieldy that keeper system was. You'd enter the store and wade into this sea of ugly plastic frames to sort through, and then when you got to the counter, there was this long line while every CD was taken out of the frame with a key, and this giant pile of frames behind the counter waiting for employees to reload them. And if I remember correctly, there were suddenly a lot of new employees at Aaron's just to reload those frames and keep the system going. My memory was that the Summer in Paradise Eco Pack came assembled and in a plastic keeper at Aaron's. It wasn't until I heard from Nicholas that I looked around online and found photos of unopened copies that I remembered getting it unassembled. Back in '92, I had a subscription to ICE, the monthly CD newsletter, which is how I knew the release dates of new CDs, and I'd also seen an article there about the new Beach Boy album coming in an Eco Pack, so I knew what to expect. I also now remember the little hype sticker warning people not to tear the package open, which I thought was a very good idea at the time because most people just tore their long boxes in half. My wife is an academic librarian, and I've enlisted her to try to find that ICE article about the Eco Pack from 1992. I've tried to keep my hype stickers since the late 70s. And I went through them looking for those Summer in Paradise hype stickers. Wasn't able to locate them for this episode. Maybe they've been lost over the years, I don't know. They might still be in there somewhere. If I come across those and if I come across that article, I will follow up with that information. I kept my long boxes for years, and they finally went in the big purge of 1997. Just went into the trash. I imagine my copy of those Eco Pack assembly instructions was in with those long boxes and went along with them. So cool that you've got yours, Nicholas. Hang on to them. Thanks for sharing that information and those photos. I really appreciate it. Moving on to episode 149, Carl and the Passion So Tough Part 2, we talked about the band Sweetwater and their leader, keyboardist Alex Del Zoppo, who played upright piano on Blondie and Ricky's tracks on Carl and the Passions. Jeff McDaniel pointed out that while Sweetwater was scheduled to be the band that opened the Woodstock Festival in 1969, the actual opening act was, of course, Richie Havens. This is Havens' 1971 album, Alarm Clock. By the way, while I was looking for those hype stickers for Summer in Paradise, I did come across the hype sticker for this album, so I thought I would show it. That's something anyway. Getting back to Richie Havens and Woodstock, according to Havens, he had been scheduled to go on 5th. By late on Friday afternoon, the concert was already about 3 hours late getting started, and the crowd was getting restless. Sweetwater hadn't arrived yet due to traffic jams, so Havens was enlisted to open the show, in part because he required minimal setup time. Also, reportedly, because Tim Hardin had steadfastly refused the organizer Michael Lang's pleas to go on first. Havens refused at first too, then relented, telling Lang he would owe him big time if the audience threw bottles at him. Havens' bass player was also stuck in traffic, so he performed only with his second guitarist and percussionist. There were no bottles and the set went great. They stretched their 20 minutes into about 30 minutes, which allowed time for Sweetwater to arrive by helicopter and become the second act on stage at Woodstock. For Havens, it was a career highlight. He was featured on both the soundtrack album and in the film, whereas Sweetwater, as Jeff points out, was omitted from both and kind of forgotten from Woodstock history. Thanks for that information, Jeff, and for the correction. I really appreciate it. Moving on to episode 146, Sail on Sailor First Impressions, Brian409 pointed out that at one point I said the date of the Carnegie Hall concerts was November 24th, 1972, It was, of course, November 23rd, 1972. Thanks for catching that, Brian. Also from that episode, I said that some of those Carnegie Hall tracks had already been released. Now pointed out that the version of Long Promised Road is different from the one on the Endless Harmony soundtrack and on the Feel Flows box, and it also sounds like the version of Student Demonstration Time is different from the one on Feel Flows. I had just looked at the dates and titles, not considering that there was an afternoon show and an evening show, so it makes sense that there would be alternate versions from the same venue on the same day. Now also pointed out that the mix of Wonderful and Don't Worry Bill is different from the mix on the Endless Harmony soundtrack. As recently as episode 99, Surfer Girl Part 1, I made the mistake of identifying Sherry of Bob and Sherry, who recorded the extremely rare 1962 Brian Wilson written and produced single Surfer Moon, as being Sharon Marie. For years I thought that was true. Brad Elliott's Surf's Up book identified her that way in 1981, citing Ginger Blake of the Honeys as the source of the information. As good as this book is, early Beach Boys scholarship has come a long way since 1981, thanks in large part to our friend Jim Murphy, who not only correctly identified Sherry as Cheryl Pomeroy in his book Becoming the Beach Boys 1961 to 1963, but gives us some interesting background information on her, including the fact that she was the girlfriend of Bob, that is of course Bob Norberg, at the time they cut Surfer Moon. While I'm on this, let me say once again, thanks Jim not only for the unparalleled information in this book, but for including an index. It was so nice to get to the information that I wanted to reference in this episode without having to scan through the entire text. For anybody that missed it, Jim appeared in episodes 143 and 144, and in episode 144, he gave us a look at one of those ultra-rare Bob and Sherry Surfer Moon singles. Of course, Brian did write and produce records for Sharon Marie. You can read about her not only in Jim's book, but in Endless Summer Quarterly number 91 from the spring of 2011, which includes an interview with Sharon Marie. Tony S. pointed out the mistake. I'm sure it jumped out at him because he tells me that he's had the pleasure of meeting Cheryl Pomeroy, Sherry, through her granddaughter. He tells me that she is a super nice woman. I really should not have made that mistake. Thanks for catching it, Tony. Really appreciate it. One mistake that nobody has pointed out but has really bothered me is that several times I have referred to the movie This Is Spinal Tap having been released in 1981, when in fact it was released in 1984. Where I get into trouble is when I talk about something that I think I know and I don't research it. I don't know why I had 1981 in mind, but 1984 is right. And in mistakes that I had nothing to do with, Ranger Girl noticed on episode 145, U.S. Pop Culture Part 3, that the record company got the name wrong on Roberta Flack's The First Time Ever I Saw Your Face single, calling it The First Time I Ever Saw Your Face, which is a much less snappy title somehow. I double-checked on the 1969 album, and they did get the name correct there. Good eye catching that, Ranger Girl. It's very subtle, but it does make quite a difference. George Hean asked if I would show the labels on the 4 and 45s that were sent to me by Wes Roberts. I assume that other people will be interested also, but if this is not your particular cup of meat, you can jump forward to about 15 minutes and 10 seconds in this video, where we'll pick it up with some other things. So here we go. I'll hold these up, but I know we'll have some trouble with glare, so I've also taken some photos that I'll show. Here's the Italian Sloop John B. There's the label. Here's the French EP with tracks from Pet Sounds. And the label on that. Here's the Spanish Good Vibrations. This one's actually one of my favorites. I think the label, this blue capital label, is very cool, and it's the only one that has a translation of the titles. Buenas Vibraciones. Here's the German Darlin. Not sure where this photo was taken, but I hope the guy in the yellow shirt, who I assume is a fan, realized and appreciated that he was shown front and center on a Beach Boy record sleeve. Here's the German capital label. And finally, here's the German Friends 45. And once again, the German label. So I hope you enjoyed that, George, and anybody else watching. Want to thank Wes Roberts once again. Quite literally could not have done that without you, Wes. Backing up just a little bit to episode 146, Sail on Sailor First Impressions, Joel Goldenberg pointed out how much Al's demo, The Road Not Taken, musically resembles Ray Peterson's 1960 number 7 hit, Tell Laura I Love Her. Try playing those back to back. They really are very similar. Good job on naming that tune, Joel. Bill Crane told us that in the booklet with Beach Boys Greatest Hits Volume 3, it says that the lead vocal for Sail on Sailor was sung by Blondie Chaplin after Dennis's attempts at it proved unsuccessful. He wonders whether a Dennis version exists, which is a good question. Along those same lines, the 1981 Surf's Up book talks about an early unreleased version of Sail on Sailor on page 284. Fall 1971 studio outtake. Following the release of Surf's Up, the title cut was planned as a British single, backed with an early version of Sail on Sailor. The release never materialized, but Steve Desper recalled a version of Sailor being nearly complete when he left the Beach Boys' employment in late 1971. This book is pretty good, though, as we've seen, it's not infallible. If they're getting their information from a Steve Desper quote, I would think that would be pretty reliable. Fall of 1971 was a full year before Sail on Sailor was finished for the Holland album, and about 6 months before Blondie joined the band, so presumably it wouldn't have been Blondie singing lead vocal, it could have been Dennis or somebody else. Now, certainly possible that no lead vocal was recorded on that. Desper said it was nearly finished. Certainly possible that if Dennis did a vocal in 71 or 72 that was wiped when Blondie did his vocal. But it does make you wonder if there is a Dennis vocal out there somewhere, or at least that nearly complete version from the fall of 1971. Thanks for mentioning that, Bill. It's very interesting stuff. I also wanted to thank William for his advice on Toronto record stores in advance of our trip there in early January. There's some great stores and I got some really nice items. I wanted to thank Baron Saturday for his recommendations on Pretty Things albums. Baron wrote the liner notes for Pretty Things box set. I'd heard about the Pretty Things, of course, for decades, but didn't really know their work. He gave me some recommendations on albums to pick up, which I picked up at Sonic Boom Records on Spadina in Toronto, those being SF Sorrow and Parachute. Thanks, I'm really enjoying these albums. They're really good. I particularly like SF Sorrow. I feel like with this one, I have learned some important information about British psychedelic music and the history of the rock opera. And additionally, I now understand more of what XTC was referencing on their Dukes of Stratosphere record. So thanks very much for that. Really enjoying those records. That'll do it for now. Thanks very much for watching. Please hit like and subscribe. We will carry on with more comments next time, concentrating on Carl and the Passions, but there'll also be some other things thrown in. Meanwhile, have a good week. Please comment on this, and if anybody knows anything about that unreleased early version of Sail on Sailor or anything like that, please keep the great comments coming. We'll see you next time. Have a great week. Bye.